Hi, and thanks for tuning in. I'm Dr. Sharif Moore of the Drug Free America Foundation, and this is the Pathways to Prevention podcast, where we discuss some of the most innovative and inspiring work being done around the world in substance use prevention, treatment, and recovery. Joining us today is Shane Varcoe, the Executive Director of the Dalgarno Institute in Australia, and the author of a superb new report entitled Cannabis and the Gateway Drug Theory, Correlation or Causation, Where Does the Evidence Point? Shane, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
My pleasure. It's lovely to be here. Thank you for having me.
Before we kind of get into the nitty gritty, would you mind just sharing with our audience your journey and how you came to work in the drug demand reduction field?
Wow, that's an open-ended question with a long narrative. I'll try and keep it brief and for the sake of our viewers. I suppose I've been working with young people for just over 40 years, and that's a long and varied history in different sectors. And it was sort of organic how I was approached by the sector about 13 years ago, because I was working for another organisation, and we're running a lot of incursions into schools, particularly with young people, looking at values-based education across a lot of different subjects. We're writing and running seminars on well-being, on development, on worldview, on mental health, emotional health, everything from bullying right through sex education, everything in between. Of course, alcohol and other drug education was part of that brief. And what was happening, I was noticing as you know, substance use, like pretty much no other addiction potential agency, is horrendous, and it has a quick and lasting impact. Sure, other things can be addictive, gambling, pornography, sex, all sorts of other issues can be addictive, but substance use, particularly illicit substances, can do untold damage quickly and sustain the damage for long periods of time. So watching that, particularly with young people developing, watching that emergence really have an incredibly devastating impact on the development potential of young people. So that was kind of bubbling in the background. I do have a brother who is a younger brother who is basically he suffers from a schizoaffective state because of his cannabis use. And this is way before the new iterations of cannabis have hit the marketplace. And people say, was that the driver for you being involved? No, he had that problem he started that problem when I was about 25, 26. So I was aware of it. And I watched the impact on him personally and on the family, and how that the addiction and the drivers that facilitates, and all the negative outcomes, and watching my family wrestle with that and having to intervene with my family in violence and in other areas, and just helping my mum and dad, who are just the most awesome people, who care and love for their son, just be taken advantage of and run over. And on watching that all happen was also a factor, but not a driver for me. So it's just I suppose a passion for young people to see them realise their potential, their capacity, their full agency, and seeing what this rabid shortcut to the diminishing of those things be unfettered, basically, growing a normalization, and again at the hands of a very, very loud but very well-funded and prolifically engaging sector. So yeah, that's kind of, there's a lot more to it, but again, I suppose ostensibly working with young people for 40 years and watching their development, helping them develop well with a minimal amount of negative impacts is probably the key driver. I hope that's helpful.
No, absolutely. And thank you for all the wonderful work you've been doing. I think the minds of our youth are a nation's most precious commodity, and to see this precious commodity under assault, the way it is, and for profit, it just boggles the mind, because as we know from the science, the adolescent brain is uniquely vulnerable to addiction. because the brain is developing until approximately the age of 26. So they have that heightened vulnerability. Now, what exactly is the status of cannabis in Australia? Do you have medical cannabis programs, or
Yeah, well, of
quote
course,
unquote medical, right?
yeah. No, thank you for that clarification. In parentheses, we do have an emerging, medical cannabis. I hate the word, medicalized cannabis. We've not. I think sadly the advantage of the disastrous American experiment is that the rest of the world is looking at this, and Uruguay obviously we predated the US, and Canada certainly leapt in the deep end pretty fast. And but yeah, we tend to follow the Canadian kind of thing because we're part of the Commonwealth. It tends to look at that, whereas the US system's a little bit different. So, but we've got the medical model has been adopted here, and again, not as brazenly and as poorly as it has been done in America. Basically, anything that, if you just stick the name medical in front of marijuana, it's a medicine. So I think we're a lot further away from that idiocy, and I'm going to use that word candidly. We have played into the hype and the propaganda that's really driven a lot of the messaging around cannabis, medical cannabis particularly. So again, anecdote is interesting. Anecdote drives sentiment, and anecdote and sentiment now drive policy formation, which I find breathtaking in a supposedly an evidence-based scientific framework that we're supposed to be operating in. We have an organisation here which mirrors your FDA, called TGA, Therapeutic Good Administration. And what was fascinating to watch is that they have not come out and pointedly said this is a medicine and this is not, because we've had, as you have in America, we've got two cannabis-based medicines, which are legitimate medicines, fully clinically trialed, double-blind, placebo-based trials that have been conducted and well and truly landed, which is, I think, Sativex and Marinol, which are basically for chemotherapy suffering patients, for appetite suppressant ignition. So they've been in our PBS, our public benefits health scheme, for 25 years. So people say, we get this new revelation of marijuana coming into as this new great panacea of all ills. It's not true. We've had medicines there for that purposes. But so what TGA have done, and I hope I can reflect this accurately, is they've not said this is medicine. There's still trials going on. And of course, Epidiolex is now, Epidiolex has now come into the marketplace as well, which is a legitimate medicine as well. B.O.W.I, Pharma, to their credit, spent $1.3 billion in 10, 12 years working very hard to ensure that they got a properly clinically trialed medicine with all the side effects and all the dynamics that are part of that. That good medicine and good medicine practice pharmaceutical practice has, ensuring that the people are getting a product that does do what it claims to do, but it also doesn't do what it's not claiming to do. You know what I mean? So it's got that whole. So they've done that well. So we've got basically three medicines, but everything else now falls under this new category is not registered, but it's recommended. As with caution, you can use certain manifestations of it. So we've landed in this really grey area, and the TGA have opened that door. And again, they have been subject to the pressure, because the politicians have been subject to pressure from the industry. Not as ferocious as it is in America. I've been following and working with a lot of people in the US, including obviously our great friends and partners, Drug Free America Foundation, and of course, SAM and other groups. And just the insanity of the lobbying done by the pro-cannabis propaganda machine is just breathtaking. So we don't have that insanity going in, but we do have this kind of grey area, which is a crack in the door, a thin end of the wedge, if you like. So yeah, it is there. CBD, the other one, just quickly, the other CBD is now, everyone's throwing that out because there is a caution around THC. People are saying, look, okay, let's be careful, which is good. But the CBD phenomena is now, it's getting its own momentum. And now over-the-counter CBD is kind of almost off the chain here. It's kind of crept in without any regulation at all. And now TGA are trying to bring in some regulations, but they're basically saying, oh, CBD's harmless. Now, we know it's not, it doesn't give you a high and create psychoaffective states, but it has got its own series of issues and concerns that the science is now revealing. It's quite concerning, both short and long term. So that's another issue that we're trying to bring to the table and say, hang on, guys, what's going on here? We're not looking at this properly. We're not vetting this as we should all medicines. And this rush to market because, everyone else is doing it, so we want to get in and try and cash in before it all goes pear-shaped, is really quite disturbing.
That harms patients. I've known cancer patients who have foregone, proven treatments in favor of CBD because of these unsubstantiated claims that have been made about the health benefits, of CBD. And it's totally crazy. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's a real concern. And of course, there's a lot of the science around the harms of CBD coming out of Australia. One of our DART team, our drug and alcohol resource team, we have a very good reference group that we have 3 professors on, including other practitioners and clinicians. We have a criminologist, a biologist, and a psychologist, 2 psychologists actually, on our reference group. And one of the leading biologists, and he's also a physician, Professor Stuart Rees, he is writing a lot of the seminal work globally on this issue. But again, the science is overwhelming. But again, anecdote trumps science. 140, they used to say, one of our favourite lines is, they used to say the pen is mightier than the sword. Now 140 character tweet is greater power than 10,000 evidence-based academic articles. I mean, literally, that's what we're contending with in this social media-driven culture, which facts and science are just sacrificed on the altar of convenience and propaganda very quickly.
Yeah, and one of the real problems we have here in the United States is how these marijuana companies are using poorly designed research as marketing, and it gives it an air of legitimacy because the average consumer, they don't have training in science. They're not able to evaluate the strengths of a research study, but the company's able to make a claim the research has shown that, marijuana can actually improve PTSD, but they don't mention that the study, only had 10 people in it. Whereas the larger studies, studies of hundreds of veterans, Iraq war veterans that had PTSD, it actually worsened their
Correct.
PTSD symptoms. And, of course, in our country, as you know, the whole FDA regulatory framework has been completely circumvented, which is it's just unheard of. So it sounds like kind of that Australia is sort of going that way too, right? That they're just bypassing the TDA, is it?
TGA,
yeah.
Look, I think that they're trying to, and I think we've got there's been some pushback, and certainly there, again, in our sector, as in America, there's a very small, by comparison, very small opponents to this, and we do wield the lion's share of evidence-based research, but unfortunately, the capacity to deploy that into the marketplace for it to be heard and taken up is really difficult. So we have to do with the best we can with what we have with our limited resources. As we all know, we've got a very small part of the pie that we get our resources from. And like yourselves, we're a very small not-for-profit charity, and we're punching way above our weight. But we have to be in the marketplace and aggressive in what we do. But yes, the TGA, as I said, we've got these little caveats that are snuck into the. They've not given an open door, but they're certainly given a crack in the door. But with the science coming out, and we're trying to get to at our federal level, we have a more conservative government federally, but we have, in a lot of our states, we have a more, I hate the word, progressive, conservative. They're just terms that can be used pejoratively. So I don't want to use those terms, but we have more liberal, and that's a different word in America, but they tend to be more pro-drug. For example, in our Australian Capital Territory, which is where our national capital is, the majority of funnily enough, it's where most bureaucrats live. So the majority of the the parliamentarians there. The party is the so-called left or progressive party, and they're all very much more into the harm reduction, normalising drug use. All those kind of things. Which again, harm reduction is a legitimate mechanism, and we have no problem with it. But when it's used as a tool to actually normalise drug use, it's a weapon against humanity, not for it. So this group now has they in their territory, which against national laws, have decriminalised cannabis use and growth. And now they're right in the process. As a result, like they did in America, they did in Seattle, they did in Colorado. Once you've got that on the table, then it's just decriminalise everything else. So they've actually got a bill and if they do it on vote only, they will get what they want. They will decriminalise all drugs for personal use in our Australian Capital Territory. Now, federally, there can be an overriding of that, and the federal government doesn't pull the trigger on that because there's a lot of backlash, as you can imagine. But we've got this kind of measure, and cannabis is that gateway drug in that sense, policy-wise. It's a gateway to other drug use because it says, okay, well, look, we've done this successfully because we bury all the evidence of harm and we laud all the evidence for profitability. But and then we sort of introduce the next phase, and well, okay, that worked. Let's try this. I'll work with it. Within 6 months of decriminalising cannabis, they threw this out there, and last December we challenged it straight away. Said, hey, whoa, we knew this was going to happen. I didn't think it was going to happen so quickly. So again, it's that in that context, a gateway. It's a gateway to other drug use purely on a policy basis.
So like a Trojan horse, right?
Correct.
To usher in broader legalization. Now, in Australia, are doctors able to recommend marijuana the same way they do here in the US?
Interesting. It's emerging because what happened, just to give you one example, 2017, the Western Australian government, they were one of the first ones to promote medical cannabis because people were wanting it. So again, the people say, oh, we want this. And again, the placebo effect around marijuana is breathtaking already, pardon the ironic pun, but it is huge. But also the placebo effect betrays a lot of the other harms that are happening under the radar, which don't become manifest until later, further on down the line, particularly if they're not heavy users. So there are those who use medical marijuana just to get high, and that's an excuse. But a lot of people aren't simply out to get weed so they can, use the medical ticket to go and get stoned. That's not their agenda. They actually believe that this is going to help them. And when they've tried it, this works. And we're seeing that there was an unleashing of this. Now, in W.A., for example, this 2007, I'll get back to this, there's 10,000 plus doctors in W.A. It's a very big state in Australia. It's huge. It's bigger than Texas, literally. And it covers about a third of our country. But population-wise, it's very, very sparse. And the concentration levels tend to be down in the southeast and now the capital city, Perth, and a few other areas. So they said, we want the doctors to prescribe medical marijuana because people want it. All doctors in 2017 in WA said, we will not prescribe this until we have more science. The science on this is not credible. And they said the harms are still there, so we're not going to do it. And the head, the premier, or if you like, the governor, in your words, of that state said, pounds his fist, come on, you've got to prescribe this. People want it. So again, now that's changed because it's become more popular and more money's come in, and now they have groups running around training doctors. There this other subsector of cannabis experts. They're going to train doctors about the benefits of that. And a lot of doctors are starting to go, okay, well, if there's other doctors banging on about this and people doing, they come up with, and some of the science, and they use the same science you do. Some of the evidence suggests, and the evidence suggests this and suggests that. And okay, so, well, and of course CBD is easier to get going because it's, they always say, it's not, you won't get stoned on this. So again, it's slowly starting to shift because again, it's just a constant barrage of push from the lobby, and recruiting, of course, like that they're pro-drug lobby do. They recruit ex-big guns and they wield their power through, again, anecdote and memes and one-liners. That's how you drive sentiment in a propaganda space. You just keep banging the same drum. War on drugs has failed. We have not had a war on drugs in this country. We never had one. But they used to hear all the time, oh, the war on drugs. What war? The first question we ask people is, sorry, can you tell me when did we fight a war on drugs in Australia? Okay, you might be able to find some sort of anchor point in America for that argument. But what about here? When did we have a war? Yeah, anyway, I digress.
And it just blows my mind that literally for the vast majority of the conditions, the qualifying conditions for which medical cannabis is recommended here in the United States, there's not a single shred of evidence of any benefit. And for some of it, it's adverse, like, especially with the mental health conditions like depression, anxiety. As far as I know, the only conditions that marijuana or THC actually have some benefit are very specific types of neuropathic pain, nausea, and then, seizure disorders, and that's it. But in all the states that have legalized marijuana for medical use or recreational use, I mean, the list of qualifying conditions is just, huge. Everything from headaches to, PTSD to Parkinson's to autism.
Yeah, look, you're dead right. I think all you need is like confirmation bias. All I need is a very small study from somewhere that I pick up on, and I'll wield that with authority. I think they call it hurling elephants. And you sort of let's look at this. I mean, wait on. What about the other science? And when you look at the glaucoma, for example, the Glaucoma Foundation came out talking about, it's good for your glaucoma, which was one of the earlier conditions that weed was kind of prescribed for. I need it for my glaucoma. Yeah. It's like, okay. Well, as I understand from the science, you when you're smoking weed for glaucoma, what it does is that you need X amount of THC, and what it does is it reduces the pressure of the eyes. It does, absolutely, for a very short period of time. Then it comes back worse. So you have to smoke it again. So basically, or use the drug with smoke, vape, ingest, whatever, delivery vehicle you're adapting, is what they found was that it doesn't fix the glaucoma. What it does is it actually makes it work. And to maintain that level of even just a modicum of order, you are permanently stoned. You are permanently stoned. And so the Glaucoma Foundation said this is not a credible medicine for glaucoma. But hey, if you want to be stoned and you want to use glaucoma as an excuse, there it is. There's your ticket. And of course, this is what's happening. And then you've got, as you said, neuropathic pain. The Pain Australia came out, and we posted their basically their word saying, if you're taking medical marijuana, it's only medical marijuana if it's been done through a proper clinical trial. If it's not medical marijuana. And then they said that they came out and said, no, cannabis is not. They've basically put on the blacklist. Cannabis is on the blacklist for pain management. But yeah, so the bottom line is we've got a culture that has reverted back to, and this is what's breathtaking. We're supposed to be progressive, yet we're reverting back to an unsustainable, a dangerous model that's going to create more harm than good. And I think just to juxtapose too, which is interesting, that you remember thalidomide?
I do, yes.
Yeah.
It caused birth defects.
Yes. Well, the US, when it came out, the US actually decided to ban it, as I understand, because it was a morning sickness drug, much like cannabis has been promoted as a morning sickness drug. But I think the FDA said, no, there's some issues with this. We're not going. Australia didn't ban it. We used it, right? We actually released it in the market. And even the last 5 years, we're still finalising class actions against those companies and paid out for those sufferers of thalidomide, the deformities. So thalidomide was banned, it was taken off, but it was released first. And so this great wonder, morning sickness is awful. If you've ever experienced someone with morning sickness, it's serious. It's just awful. It's just a terrible, terrible condition. Some people suffer with it. Some women suffer with it terribly. And so this was a great, panacea to the morning sickness, and yet the side effects, because it wasn't properly clinically trialed. And now we're going with marijuana. We're leaping into a similar space because we now know it has huge implications on the developing fetus. And so we've got this, emerging, public health disaster coming down the line. Well, it's already emerging now, but we're still ignoring that data as we move forward. We're saying, no, well, we'll be fine. We'll manage the damage. But the rates of defects, of all kinds of defects, are manifesting because of cannabis involvement in those demographics.
And some of them don't manifest until later in childhood and adolescence. Like the research is showing just a whole array of neurocognitive and neurobehavioral deficits, poor mental health, impulsivity, cognitive deficits. There was even a study that came out of Canada not too long ago showing an association with autism.
Yes.
So it's really frightening.
Yeah, and I think that's a real concern and this is where the whole causation and correlation issue comes in. Of course, the bad guys, the bad actors, they always throw up the correlation argument. It's correlation effect. It's not a causation. You've got to make that link. And I think the links are becoming more and more evident, and undeniably so. I think that's going to be the real issue at the moment with the wave of propaganda and the wave of anecdotal vomit, for want of a better word, that's kind of gushing over all of us, is that it is, the science is, it's there, and it's clearly there. You can see a lump in the vomit. Sorry to remember that motif. You can see a lump there, but it's not quite definable. It's just but I think when they wash away this debris, they're going to start to see some of the really serious outcomes. And there's going to be, like with thalidomide, sadly, we're going to see this reversal, and then there's going to be lawsuits. Again, like, asbestos, DDT, the famous, the insecticide that was, the gentleman got, I believe, a Nobel Peace Prize for creating it. And it was wonderful for what it did. But all of a sudden, 20, 30 years down the line, the side effects of this thing were just staggering. And we've got, for example, in Australia, we've got entire regions, land that cannot be used for grazing. It can only be used for plant-based things because of the lasting impact of this. Again, I know that's a bit of a long juxtapose, but you get my point. We tend to leap in with these, and then more so with this cannabis. The science is still screaming at us. No, whoa, slow down. This thing was, I look at sitcoms and television shows. I'm going back watching some of the shows that were done in the early 2000s and then the 10s, and the constant reference to weed being, hopefully one day it'll be legal. It's going to be great. It's got medicine. It's got great potential. It's sown through all these television series, and the promise of the panacea of weed has been there, like aggressively been there for 20 years now. Now, 20 years of promise with the science that we've thrown at it to extract from this now totally engineered plant. It's not even natural anymore. There's no natural weed on the planet anyway. It doesn't exist. It is now, after all that science and all that promise and all that capacity, we're still struggling to get even a small benefit out of it. Not saying there's no benefit. Sativex, yes, it's helpful for people with cancer patients. And Epidiolex, yes, it has a 25% efficacy rate. It's a fourth-line treatment for Dravet syndrome epilepsy. So it's not even the first line. It's the fourth line. Yes, and with some, like all drugs are idiosyncratic, it does have a wonderful impact on certain people, but it has a lot of side effects. So again, you got this kind of, this is no panacea. This is even barely it barely registers on a serious medicinal, sort of meter. It barely registers. It just moves the needle. But we're raving as if it's this panacea. But again, that's what propaganda does. It misrepresents and bludgeons you with its rant until you succumb and go, oh, okay, let's just do it.
Yeah, and not only that, I think part of the problem in terms of at least diminishing the harm, in people's perception is that people are still thinking of the 1960s and 70s
Mm,
era cannabis, where it was, 2 to 3% THC, and the risks were much less. But now, what we have today, as you said, I don't know that you could even classify it as cannabis or marijuana because really now the product is THC. And so the risks are greatly compounded, and you're really seeing them, manifest at the population level. Any single user might use frequently, heavily, and perhaps be fine. But when you're looking at it,
mm,
from the population perspective, this is where we're starting to see the, rise in incidence in
mm,
suicides, in schizophrenia, psychotic disorders. Um, Unfortunately, in the US, and this kind of boggles my mind because our public health system is appallingly bad. We have to look towards, Europe and
mm,
Scandinavia, other places where they're actually collecting data on the incidence of schizophrenia and other, public
mm.
health and mental health indicators, which we're not doing that here. I just don't understand why, but that certainly helps big marijuana.
Interesting you brought that up, I think, because what we've seen in the last 5 years, we've seen we've noticed it because I've been in this particular sector for about 12 years now. Prior to that, I was more in the education delivery side of things. So the next level back of research and understanding some of the public health and community impacts weren't as prominent. But since I've been in this space and having to advocate from the top down as well as educate from the bottom up, I've had to become a little bit more, well, a lot more across the data and understanding it. But what we're seeing is a collapsing of the drug use impact into the mental health data. They're not saying it contributes to, and this is the factors. It just collapses it. Everything's mental health. So the pro-drug lobby and the harm reduction only groups, now that's an important distinction, harm reduction only ideologists, they're not people who want to, who hate drug use and want to get people exit drug use and keep them alive while they do it, which is a wonderful and noble thing. These people want to use harm reduction as a vehicle to normalise drug use. And Australia has been the world leaders in the misuse of harm reduction, and they're trying to export that across Asia. So we have 3,500 needle distribution programs in this country now. We have injecting rooms. Again, the endeavour is not so much to save lives because they've been hijacked by the pro-drug lobby come in behind it. Again, the data is being lost, so we can't delineate it out from the other, like schizophrenia because of drug use. Manic depressive, bipolar because of drug use, psychosis because of drug use, family violence because of drug use. They're collapsing all the data in and trying to hide it. That's happened in the last 5 years. And we can go back, and we've actually written a few pieces just sort of showing that, saying, well, hey, what's happening here, guys? Because if we need to lay down the lines and say, well, this is an incidence of, for example, schizophrenia or psychotic episodes. And I think marijuana has now been linked to the biggest leap from having a psychotic episode to a psychotic condition, even double that of LSD, almost double that of LSD now, because again, you're going back to your statement. This is not the original designed plant that nature produced. It's just not that plant. Cannabis, to be cannabis, must have all the components in its natural order. Then between 80 and 120, depends on who you talk to. Cannabinoids is about 400 different compounds in cannabis. So it's a naturally occurring plant. Your 2.5% THC is counted by your CBD and your CBN, because the CBD we know has an antipsychotic impact. So, and it's fascinating to watch, digressing into that space, it's fascinating to watch the people now banging on about, THC does this, we legalize weed. Oh, but guess what? We found out CBD can be antipsychotic. We can use it to treat cannabis use disorders. It's hilarious. I mean, it's weed logic. It's just weed logic, because the natural occurring plant would have all those things. But as you said, it's been so engineered now that the natural occurring cannabis plant or marijuana plant does not exist anywhere on the planet. It just doesn't exist anymore. It's a engineered substance in a plant form. That's what it is.
Well, and now they have these, ultra potent forms that are just basically pure THC, 95, 96, up to 100, almost 100% THC, like the wax, dabs, shatter, butane
Butter.
hash oil.
Yeah.
And just the reports, like we recently had our Southeastern Drug Summit, and we had a couple of presenters from Colorado, including a woman who lost her son to suicide, and he was a user of these high potency products. And the really scary thing and the tragic thing is once, especially when they're young and they're using these high potency products, and they develop a psychotic disorder, it's for many it's permanent.
Correct.
There's no going back from it.
I think that's one of the biggest concerns we have, particularly with the developing brain. As you said, between the ages of puberty, whichever they may be, up to the age of 26. Now, the arguments, the science we're looking at is saying even up to 32 for men. Males have a longer potential for developmental brain development. The second most important, of course, brain developmental phase is when puberty is hit. The first is between the ages of sort of 0 and 6. That's when so much of the brain grows to its full size, but then it continues to develop. And the second phase when it's culling its all the branches and whatnot. Anyway, but the concern for us is, as you said, the permanency of these problems. And we know from some of the science that an adult is a heavy adult user abstains from cannabis for 90 days to 120 days, then cognitive function can return. It's slow, but it can return. And if you stay off the weed, you may get back full function, which is great. So the argument could be for the adult, oh, well, I can use weed, and when I want to stop, I'll stop. And of course, the addiction factors, we won't even go down that road. So the complexities of that, easy in, easy out kind of model, we know from addiction medicine and science that it's not that easy. There's a whole bunch of factors, including physiological as well as sociological and anthropological factors that go into making addiction as powerful as it is. So, walking back out of that is not easy. But when you've got a teenager with a developing brain, flooding their system with these neurotransmitting brain cell destroying elements, literally, you're rewiring the brain. And once you step into that psychotic space, particularly because of the idiosyncratic nature of substances based on the human condition, because we're all different. And one person can smoke weed in the same batch, and you can have two completely different responses. It's like MDMA. We've had people in Australia, the same drugs, literally the same batch. One person dies, two people get sick, and one person has a good time and has a hangover for a week later, of course, as you do. But you've got this idiosyncratic response from the substance. But when it comes to the developing brain, the idiosyncratic nature of that goes up a whole new level. And that permanent disability that can emerge from that is quite scary. Now, they may get back cognitive function, but it'll never be quite the same as it was. So therefore, their trajectory developmentally and their potential and their capacity and agency moving forward are also being robbed. And that's what I love Bertha Madrasa's great, line about, we're not fighting against drugs, we're fighting for the brains of a generation. I think that's completely correct. And we use that mantra often in our dialogue with people, because this is a lot of this is irreparable. And when you start talking on a public health level to a generation of harm, and we're talking up to, let's say, at the age of 30. Let's put 30 as a limit. Then they argue now that 97% of all addictions happen before the age of 30 anyway. So let's just tag it at that. And once you've got that in play, then you've got this whole generation 18. Whereas in America, you guys raised your drinking age to 21, legal age 21 under Reagan, which was brilliant. We had it at 21, and we dropped it to 18 during the Vietnam War. So trying to get that back has been impossible. So from the 18 to 30, you've got so-called grown-ups, adults, who are, and if they started early because they want to be grown-ups, because when every 15-year-old wants to be a grown-up, and they say, I'm going to use weed, I'm going to use whatever, drink or whatever. Once they start down that path, unabated, then they've got some real issues. And that long-term harm is often, as I said again, irreparable. And that public health nightmare, let alone the loss of humanity, the loss of productivity, the loss of human capacity, the gene pool being permanently damaged as a result of this, is just staggering. Yet this kind of overwhelming, we can manage harm reduction. We'll manage it with harm reduction. That's a standard line. Oh, harm reduction will fix that. Damage management is not a solution to a permanently harmed person. All you're doing is containing ongoing harms, and you're not actually helping that person develop. And that's the default position of the pro-drug lobby, and that's getting leverage in the public square. That's concerning.
Yeah, I recently wrote a report on supervised injection facilities, and I read up on a couple of the facilities in Australia. And on the face of it, I don't know how the proponents are able to continue to justify them when, like, for example, the one in, if I recall correctly, I believe it was in Richmond, their overdose rates was 100 and something times higher than street users. For the King's Cross, I think it was over 60 times higher. So I don't see how that can be cost effective.
Again, that the sector in Australia is run by harm reduction. And I don't want to get to the intricacies of policy. We did a series of videos, which is on our YouTube channel, called Drug Policy Changing the Narrative, which explains, it's a series that Drug Free America Foundation have used, explains what has happened. Again, the policies in and of themselves have got some good potential, but again, if harm reduction and the exit from drug use was the goal and the only goal, then there's value in any and all of these mechanisms. No argument there. We want to see the argument you can't rehabilitate a dead drug user is a great line, and we just throw that out there. It's like the war on drugs as well. Yeah, but are you rehabilitating the drug user? Because every time you empower an injecting episode, regardless of whether it's in a supervised environment or not, you are putting that person's life at risk and their health at risk every single time. And the argument is they're going to do it anyway. Correct. For every one episode in an injecting room, there's between 70 and 99 happen outside the injecting room anyway. So the argument is...
That's what I was going to say. I mean, how many users actually want to go to the trouble to go to the injection, especially if you have a heroin addiction and you're starting to rattle, you're not going to go cross town to an injection room.
The argument we've put out there, and the simple question we ask is, again, exactly, why would you leave the comfort of your own home or your own squat to travel to another space when you're Jones in to get an injection? The simple question is because you've got a product you're not sure about. So you go to the injecting room and you're under supervision, state-sponsored, taxpayer-sponsored supervision. You can experiment with a drug with minimal risk. Well, you get we got naloxone is now free to everybody in Australia. It's been carte blanche for the last 5 years. So naloxone's everywhere for overdose withdrawal, which is great. I get that. But now we have naloxone parties. So you can try whatever drug you want, and then the user who's supplying the gear will come and bring you back if you tend to die. So again, we've got this. Again, the misuse of harm reduction is rife. So you go to injecting room to try a substance that you're not sure about. And if it's a bad trip, then the chances of you dying because you're going under supervision are going to be less. Now, is that a good thing? I said it's a good thing in one sense that a person's life's been saved, absolutely. But you're also enabling them to deliberately put themselves at risk to try a substance and then talk about the development of that product. Okay, well, this was too hot, cut it down a bit, there's too much fentanyl in it, whatever. It becomes an experimental tool for the drug using sector rather than a vehicle to help people exit drug use. That's got to be the ultimate outcome. And if that is not the single greatest priority, then what is the priority of this purpose? It's literally normalizing drug use. And what was happening in Richmond it was just insane. And then the local people are up in arms. The police were up in arms about it, and they kind of, in one sense, the police are kind of, this would be a good thing for them but they were up in arms about it because they saw the crime rates going up. There were people in the facility dealing drugs to the people coming in. They had to be sacked.
Well, that's the other thing. It creates a
Oh,
nucleus for, a captive market for drug dealers.
it's called the honeypot syndrome, and all the bees come in now, and that's exactly what they said. Oh, it doesn't do that, but it does. We've seen the evidence for that. So, but again, you can make evidence dance, and this is the thing: that the harm reduction sector in Australia is all about, because we're the world leaders in harm reduction. So we're exporting this across the planet. In other words, injecting rooms. And although Europe did a little bit of this, we started in 1985 with our harm minimisation platform, which is a good platform, by the way. It has 3 pillars, and for the first time in this latest iteration, 2017, was demand reduction was the first pillar, the very first pillar, demand reduction. First time in its 35-year history. Then supply reduction, and then harm reduction is for those caught in the tyranny of addiction at the bottom of the cliff to rescue them and to keep them alive and help them exit drug use. But now harm reduction and harm minimisation are interchangeable terms. I do harm reduction. Now, hang on a minute. I do harm minimisation. And then I'll start talking about ejecting rooms and decriminalising drugs and syringe programs. No. Harm minimisation has 3 pillars, and the priority is demand reduction. And that should be the highest priority. Now, just to give you a juxtapose again, Sharif, we have three different substances in our drug policy framework. We have tobacco, alcohol, like yourself, and illicit substances. Now, in Australia, we have arguably the lowest daily tobacco use rates in the entire world, because we have only one focus, one voice, and one message in the marketplace around tobacco, and that's quit. We introduced plain packaging to our tobacco. We introduced that, the first in the world. We've gone hard after tobacco. We have one mantra: quit. There is no dissenting voices in the marketplace. There's no one saying, "Oh, you could still use a little bit." There's no safe smoking rooms. There's no, it's quit. Sure, there are failures on the way to that goal, but it doesn't shift. So the inability to achieve the quit goal does not drive all the other policy frameworks. They are allowed and permitted, but there's only one focus: quit. One focus, one message, one voice. When it comes to alcohol, because the industry is so entrenched in the culture, and by the way, we have our daily tobacco rates on average daily usage is about 12.5% of the population. At the end of World War II, the aggregate population use daily smoking was 52%. So that's a huge reduction, and on a socially acceptable legal drug, by the way. Remember that. It's legal and socially acceptable. But with alcohol in our country, we've had to change the last 10 years because we've seen a spike in misuse, and they've gone after the industry because it self-regulates. And now COVID's changed it, but now we've got our messaging around alcohol is moderate, be responsible, moderate, be responsible. Sure, it's better than quit, but not as good as quit, but it's there. But when it comes to illicit drugs, the mantra is keep using, just don't die. Keep using, just don't die. Keep using. So same drug framework, same harm minimisation framework with 3 pillars. One is quit, one is moderate, one is keep using, just don't die. The cognitive dissonance in this place is just staggering. And of course, what you need to do is to keep that argument going. You have to cut it off from origins and cut it off from good practice and just talk about it in its own little context. So in other words, drug use is its own maelstrom, and it is a maelstrom. It's awful, creates a maelstrom. So we're trying to fix the storm rather than say, hey, what created the storm? Let's step back from the storm and let's start dealing with that. Because what we're doing is adding to this maelstrom. Are we adding to, like, the argument for us is what are we doing? Is it reducing recovery, facilitating recovery from drug use, or is it enabling, empowering, equipping, and endorsing ongoing drug use? It's a simple question. Is what mechanism is it doing one or the other? And if it's not reducing and facilitating recovery from drug use and remediating from drug use, then what is it doing? And I think that they're just, and so you got to then reevaluate the policy mechanism on the basis of those questions and say, well, okay, so is this helping people recover and exit drug use? No, in fact, but is it being used to normalize drug use? And that's the agenda of the pro-drug lobby. They infiltrate the harm, the genuine, legitimate, please hear that, the genuine and legitimate harm reduction sector of people who hate drugs but want to keep people alive until they can exit drug use. It's a noble cause and a right cause, but they infiltrate that sector and then they use semantic contagion to reframe the language, and then they drive these things. Oh, we went from needle exchange to needle distribution. So there's no accountability anymore because they started off with needle exchange. Because like anyone, they start using drugs. Once you've had your hit, you don't care what you do with the syringe, you throw it away.
Yeah.
Respond. Not everyone who does IV drug use is like that. Of course, we know that. I'm not going to tar everyone with the same brush. But as you said, the addicted person who's jonesing, and just wants a hit and don't care what happens next, then that person is a public health liability to themselves, but also to those around them. And we got 3,500 needle distribution programs. And I could walk into one tomorrow without questions and say, can I have some syringes here? How many do you want? No questions asked. And then
Are
my
you able to
neighborhoods.
buy them at the pharmacy in Australia without a prescription?
Interesting. We had to fight because diabetics in this country had to pay for their syringes, but drug users didn't have to. So they had the diabetic group fought. They finally got the right to have free syringes as well. It's
Well, at least something good came of it.
Yeah, exactly. But as far as prescription, you don't need to go to a pharmacy because you have these houses, these little places all through the community. The fundamental problem, Sharif, there is zero accountability. And because, if you want accountability, you're punitive, Sharif. That's your problem. You're punitive. And therefore, you have a criminal justice mindset. A healthcare mindset just cares for the patient. No. A healthcare professional cares about susceptibility and exposure, always.
Right.
Etiology demands it. So he has to monitor and deal with the environmental factors that create exposure and susceptibility. Failure to do that is poor medical practice, and it has prescriptive elements, not just prescriptive. And all proscriptive elements have a prohibition element to them, and there are consequences and accountability factors entailed in that. It's just good science, but it's ignored again. Once drug is involved, what you call rational thinking exits the stage because, substance use just unravels that process quite quickly.
Well, thank you so much, Shane. This has been such a delight to talk with you.
Likewise.
Wish you all the best in your endeavors, and I look forward to working and collaborating in the future.
Oh, absolutely, Sharif. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you, and hopefully it's useful. And you have a great rest of the evening.
Thanks again, Shane, and thank you to all of our listeners. This podcast is made possible with the generous support of the Adelson Family Foundation. And to find out more about the great work Drug Free America Foundation is doing all over the world, please visit our website at www.dfaf.org. Thanks again.